is the Citroen e-C4, the all-electric version of the company's super funky hatchback, and it's also their first proper take at an all-electric family car. The only problem for Citroen is this is an extremely competitive corner of the market. I'm talking the Volkswagen ID.3 and the Kia e-Niro, to name but a few. So is Citroen onto a winner with the e-C4? Well, today I'm going to try and find out. But before we go any further, if you like what we do, why not give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. We're going to start things off with what makes an e-C4 an e-C4. And it's this thing right here, a 136 horsepower, 260 Newton meter electric motor that sends power to the front wheels. Now, admittedly, that doesn't actually sound like a lot of power, even compared to other cheap electric cars. Now, it'll send you from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 9.7 seconds, which is hardly electric, and it has a top speed of 93 miles per hour. So if you're driving an e-C4, you're probably best avoid a German autobahn unless you want to really scare yourself. But the e-C4 isn't about performance, it's about wafting, and you can waft along for up to 217 miles courtesy of a 50 kilowatt hour battery. Now, that's about on par with some other entry-level electric cars, but still you can get cheaper EVs such as a Nissan Leaf and a Kia e-Niro that are about the same price that will give you more range. It is, however, better than what you get on a Mazda MX-30, as is the case with a lot of EVs, and you can watch my review of the MX-30 by clicking the link in the top right hand corner. The e-C4 might not be that quick in a straight line, but when it comes to charging, it can be quite nippy. And that's because it supports up to 100 kilowatt charging. All you need to do is find a suitable charger. And when you do, you'll be able to go from 0 to 80% battery in around 30 minutes, which is pretty quick. The e-C4 isn't the kind of car that you get if you want to make a statement about being an electric car driver, because it looks pretty much exactly the same as the standard C4. The only real differences are you've got blue highlights around the front bumper here instead of silver. You've got some more blue highlights down the side of the car, a few E-badges and different 18-inch wheels. There's also no exhaust at the back of the car either, for very obvious reasons. But I actually think the new C4 generation is a seriously good looking car, particularly with this new X motif at the front of the car that is highlighted by these new lights. And I really like this light pod here, which kind of reminds me a bit of the light system that you get on a Porsche. You get the same kind of X graphic at the back of the car too. And because it's all done with LEDs, it's a really punchy look, particularly at night. And what sets the e-C4 apart from the rest of the competition, at least in terms of design, is the roofline, which is much more like a coupe-like roof compared to other hatchbacks and crossovers. And that harks back to the original C4 from the mid-2000s. Now, on to pricing. How much does the e-C4 cost? Well, it all kicks off at around £34,000 for the entry-level car, with the top spec model coming in at 35. So not a big difference between the entry level and the top spec car. And if you go for that very, very top spec car, the Shine Plus, the only real differences are a bit more luxury inside. You get a better sound system, and you also get a suite of semi-autonomous driving modes. And it's pretty competitively priced as well, because it goes up against the mid-range of the VW ID.3 lineup. Of course, you don't have to pay full price if you don't want to, because there are plenty of new and used deals to be had on e-C4s over at yesauto.co.uk. The e-C4 actually has the same boot capacity as the regular piston-powered C4, which is actually quite rare, because a lot of cars, when they're converted from a piston car to an EV, they usually store the batteries either below the rear seats or underneath the boot floor. But in the e-C4, it's stored underneath the passenger compartment. And that means we've got 380 litres in the back here, which is very much on par with the rest of the competition. Now, there's actually an extra compartment below the boot floor, which is a great place to store your cables, and leaving the rest of your boot for things like luggage and groceries and dogs maybe. And it's also an adjustable boot floor, so you can open up even more space in the back. Now, not all of the e-C4's competitors have that. If you love putting stuff in your car, leaving it there for decades and forgetting about it, then the e-C4 is the car for you. And that's because we've got not only a relatively deep storage bay under the armrest, but we also have a storage bay with 2 cup holders in it, a storage tray under the dashboard with another storage tray hidden below it, and another storage tray above it that on top spec cars features a wireless charger. But best of all is the hidden iPad storage tray and stand, so your front passenger can sit and watch movies on a long car journey without physically having to hold their iPad. The overall build quality and design is pretty good too, and the seats that I'm sat on are incredibly comfortable, and you can get them in leather if you go again for that Shine Plus top spec car. Now all cars come with a 10-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is relatively easy to use, although it's not the sharpest and most responsive thing on the market. And of course you can use Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which pretty much bypasses the whole system anyway. Plus there's a digital instrument cluster on all cars, and that not only shows you things like your speed, but also critical information like your range and also your efficiency. Rear legroom in the back of the e-C4 is actually pretty good. So I'm just below 6 foot, and I've got the driver's seat in my position, and I've got plenty of legroom, but headroom is a bit on the tight side. So if you were 6 foot and over, it might be a bit of a squeeze, and it's all because of that coupe-like roofline. As for the rest of the back seats, well, there's not a whole lot to do back here. There's no armrest, which is a bit of a shame, but you do get climate vents, and there's also a couple of USB ports. One of them is a regular USB and the other a USB-C. On the road in the e-C4, and admittedly, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Now I want to start off with performance, because earlier I said on paper this really doesn't sound like a very brisk car, but being an EV, there's always this near instant torque. So even though we don't have a lot of power, it still feels as though it's really good at getting up to speed quickly, particularly if you've got it in sport mode, and that's when it really starts to get a bit of a move on when you put your foot down. Admittedly though, most of the time I'm driving, I've got it in eco mode because I want to use up as little battery as possible, because we're now going to get onto the bit that really confuses me about the e-C4, and it is the battery and range. So, like I said earlier, it's got a claimed range of about 217 miles. In the real world, that's never the case. It's always going to be a little bit less than that. Now, you're probably looking at between about 160 and 190 miles. And when I calculated the efficiency in here, it came to about 3.7 to 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour, which comes in at around about 190 miles. I'm a bit confused, however, because I don't think you can trust the estimated range in this car. Now, this morning I covered 55 miles and I had a full battery. So it said I had the full 217 miles. And I used a little bit of motorway driving, a bit of town driving, and also some country roads as well. So there was a lot of opportunity to recoup some energy, both under braking and when you're just pootling around town. However, it says I have 85 miles left. So I seem to have used about 140 miles in the space of 55 miles. Which is a little bit confusing, and it'll give you some serious range anxiety, because then, again, I'm poodling around at the moment at about 40 miles an hour. I've covered 2 miles, and on here it says I've covered 5. And for you EV buffs, if you're wanting to know what the temperature is, it's around about 15, 16 degrees today. So it's not the warmest day in England, but it's by no means the coldest either. So we should still be getting pretty good battery efficiency. And how about the drive? Well, it's a Citroen, so it feels very soft. And in most parts, this is really very lovely. Because we've got a very soft suspension setup, you can go over some really nasty bumps, and it just doesn't make any impact in the cabin whatsoever. This car is seriously comfortable on most roads. That being said, the e-C4 is quite a bit heavier than the regular C4, and I'm not sure if they've adjusted the suspension to handle the extra weight, because if you put it through a corner at anything above 30 miles an hour, you will experience a fair bit of wallow. It will lean over quite a bit, and because you've got these very comfortable but not massively supportive seats, you'll find yourself moving around a bit as well. Because with all that extra weight, when you hit the brakes, there is a little bit of pitching forward. So if I apply them now, you really do lean forward. Now, most of the time you can be quite smooth with your braking inputs, but it's when you're going around start-stop traffic, particularly on the M25, and you find yourself constantly doing emergency stops, you'll find the car lurching forward a fair bit. Now, it does sound like I'm having a go at the e-C4, but it's worth bearing in mind that this is Citroen's first proper stab at a mass-produced EV, and I do think they've done a really good job. And I think it's one of the most comfortable cars you can get at this price range. It just requires a different approach to driving, even for a Citroen driver. And I think if you live outside of a town centre, you might find yourself suffering from a little bit of range anxiety. It's not the best in class. I think if I was to go for an EV in this price range, I'd go for the slightly better, if not quite as interesting, Kia e-Niro. But if you want something that's very, very soft, very relaxed, and completely silent, then you might want to give the e-C4 a bit of a look.